Hello again. Just to remind you, we're reading the I Survived book of I Survived the Attack of the Grizzlies in 1967. And in chapter 1, our main character, Mel, is running from a grizzly that is running after her, and she's climbing a tree and she is starting to fall. That's how chapter 1 ended. And then in chapter 2, it went to 2 days prior to that excitement around the campfire with her grandfather. And we talked about the fact that the setting is in 1967 and the cabin they're staying in Glacier National Park was 60 years old. So we were talking about what year was that cabin built. And if you thought about it and did the math, it was built in 1907, right after the turn of the century. That is a really old cabin. So today we're going to go to chapter 3 and see what exactly is happening. Papa is starting to tell the kids about a story about an animal that attacked him, and it was very scary for him. It happened a very long time ago, Pops began. I was maybe 10 years old. Mel looked at her grandfather, whose face was lit up by the firelight. He had white hair, a matching mustache, and skin that was all crinkled like an old map. It was hard to imagine that he'd once been a kid like her. But there was an old photo of him hanging on the wall in the cabin. Little boy Pops, with his buzz cut and freckles. He was proudly holding up a big trout he'd caught in the lake. I was walking through the woods, Pop went on, but not too far from here, maybe a mile up the lake. I was heading back to the cabin, whistling some silly tune, swinging my lantern, not a care in the world, until I heard a noise just ahead, a noise like I'd never heard before. Pop leaned forward. It sounded like this. Click, clack, click, clack, click, clack. Was it an alligator? Kevin asked. He loved alligators. Most kids had teddy bears. Kevin slept with a stuffed alligator their Aunt Cassie had given him. Shh, Mel said gently. Pops dropped his voice to a whisper. I should have stopped, or at least slowed down, or found a different route. But I just kept walking along like a big dummy, and suddenly, wham! Something whacked my calf. I never felt such pain in my life, not before or since. The animal ran off. I never got a good look at it. I hobbled over to a tree stump, shining my lantern onto my leg. I saw the strangest thing. Dozens of long black needles sticking deep into the meat of my calf. And of course, I realized what creature had attacked me. What was it? Kevin asked. Pop raised his eyebrows at Mel. She'd heard this story 100 times before. It was a porcupine, Mel said. A porcupine, Kevin repeated, frowning. He crossed his skinny arms over his t-shirt. Pops, a porcupine is not a scary animal. Who says? Pop boomed. All creatures fear the porcupine. Pop explained that porcupines had more than 30,000 quills on their bodies. The spikes protected them from enemies, bigger animals that wanted to eat them. Each quill was like a small arrow. When a porcupine's attacker tried to take a bite, it wound up stabbed in the snout. And when a porcupine got mad or felt threatened, watch out. With one whack of its tail, a porcupine could deliver dozens of quills deep into enemies' flesh. That's what happened to Pop. My mother had to use pliers to get the quills out, Pop said, wincing. Took her about 3 hours. I fainted once from the pain. Kevin huffed. I hate porcupine, Pops. Oh no, Pop said. Don't blame the porcupine. It was just protecting itself. It warned me with that click, clack, click, clack. It was telling me, I'm here, please go away. But I was walking around like I owned the forest. I showed no respect. Showing respect in the wild, that was a big thing for Pops and Mom too. She was always reminding Mel that Glacier really belonged to the animals. We're just guests here, she liked to say. Both she and Pops worried that the park was getting too crowded, and some people didn't understand how to act when they were hiking or camping. It used to drive Mom crazy. When people littered on the trails, Mom's temper could be fiery too, just like Mel's. Excuse me, she'd yell, handing the person an empty soda bottle or a Milky Way wrapper. I think you dropped something. Tell us another story, Pops, Kevin pleaded. Tell about the wolverine, or a wolf, or a tiger, or an alligator. Pops chuckled. Enough stories for tonight, he said. He stood up slowly, his stiff knees cracked. Remember, Aunt Cassie's coming tomorrow, right after breakfast. Yay, Kevin said. Aunt Cassie was Mom's best friend. She always joined them for a few days in Glacier. Last year, Mel would have been counting down the minutes until Aunt Cassie showed up in her little red Volkswagen. But the last thing Mel needed now was another reminder of Mom, another reason to cry. Kevin slid off Mel's lap and scampered toward the cabin. Race ya, Pops, he called. Put out the fire, would you, Mel? Pops asked. Then they turned and started limping after Kevin. I'm coming for you, and I'm bringing my porcupine with me, Pops said. Kevin shrieked happily, and they disappeared into the darkness. A minute later, Mel heard the crack and slam of the front porch door. Mel doused the fire with water from the lake and used a shovel to pile sand on the smoldering logs. Even a little ember could drift into the woods and start a fire. There was already more than 10 wildfires burning in the northern parts of the park. So far, firefighters had kept them from spreading, but one windy night could change that, especially in August when the weather was hot and dry. Mel threw on extra sand just to be sure. When the fire was good and out, Mel stood for a few minutes, leaning on the shovel. She stared up at the stars. She could see a million more here than back in Milwaukee. And that's when she noticed something strange. The total silence. The owls had stopped hooting. The night bugs weren't buzzing. The whole forest seemed to be holding its breath. And then Mel heard a twig snap. Leaves rustling, deep wheezing breathing. The hair on Mel's arm stood straight up. She wasn't alone. Something was here, something big. Let's find out what. Chapter 4. Mel looked into the woods but couldn't see a thing. It was too dark. She put down the shovel and pushed away her jitters. She had no reason to feel scared. There was no crime in Glacier. Pops didn't even have a lock on the cabin door. Their worst fear was that a skunk would sneak into the house and stink everything up. Mel took a step toward the cabin, and then she heard it. Grrr. At first she thought it was thunder, but the sky was perfectly clear. Grrr. She stopped, her heart pounding. Should she run? Stay still? What was out there? She remembered Grandpa's story about the porcupine. Was this animal trying to scare her away? She swallowed hard and slowly turned to look. She froze. The shape of an enormous animal hovered at the edge of the woods. A second later, it stepped out of the shadows into the pool of the moonlight. Mel gasped. The creature had shaggy fur and dark eyes. But it was the hump that rose between its shoulders that told Mel what it was. A grizzly bear. She blinked. It seemed impossible, like it had leaped out of Kevin's imagination. Except that Mel could see it. She could hear it. And now the voice in her mind was screaming in panic, "Run, run!" But somehow Mel shut out the screeching voice in her brain. She didn't run or shriek, because if she did that, the grizzly bear would almost definitely come after her and probably attack. Mom had told her that over and over. Grizzlies' attacks are very rare. No person has ever been killed by a grizzly in Glacier. In fact, most people who come here never even see one, even if they search for weeks. Still, Mom always wanted Mel to be prepared for anything. And so now Mel did exactly what Mom had told her to do. If a grizzly slowly rose up onto its hind legs, she didn't look it in the eye. She didn't want to make it feel threatened. With her eyes glued to the ground, she walked backwards toward the cabin, very slowly. Out of the corner of her eye, Mel saw the grizzly drop back down onto all fours. She felt its eyes drilling into her. Its growls and grumps rumbled in her ears. Step by shaky step, Mel kept walking backwards. The cabin was only a few yards away, but it seemed like hours before she got there. And then Mel couldn't stop herself. She turned and practically flew up the rickety wooden stairs to the porch. She burst into the cabin and slammed the heavy wooden door shut behind her. Mel? Pops asked. He and Kevin were right there on the porch. Pops was reading Kevin his bedtime story. What happened? Mel didn't say a thing. She was looking out the small square window in the door. It was very dark outside, but there was just enough moonlight to see that there was nothing on the porch. Mel's knees went weak with relief. The bear hadn't followed her. She spun around and locked eyes with Pops. I saw a grizzly, she stammered. Pop put the book down. Where? Right outside. It came out of the woods by the beach, and I thought maybe it followed me. Mel saw the doubt in Pop's face. Are you sure? Pop said. Grizzlies don't bother with people. You know that. Of course I know that, Mel started, but Kevin cut her off. I want to see the grizzly. He jumped off the couch, but Mel could stop him. Before she could stop him, he'd flung open the door. And there it was, standing on the porch, the grizzly on all fours, staring at her little brother. Kevin! Mel snatched her brother and kicked the door shut with her foot. They all stood there for a moment, frozen in shock. Mel couldn't help herself. She held Kevin tight and stepped to the small window. Pops leaped in to look too. The bear was still there. It was pacing back and forth, sniffing the ground. There's something wrong with that bear, Pops said. Look how thin it is. Pops was right. The bear was very big, but its light-colored brown coat seemed to hang off its skeleton. Mel could see the outline of its spine poking out through its fur. Kevin reached out and knocked on the window. Hi, bear! Hi, bear! No, Kevin, don't, Mel warned him, grabbing his hand. Too late. The bear looked at them and slowly rose onto its hind legs. Then, with the speed of a striking cobra, the enormous bear lunged at the door. Its giant clawed paw came smashing through the window, right toward Kevin's face. Man, this is a scary book, every chapter. So that's the end of chapter 4 for tonight. We'll have to see what happens. See you next time. Bye.